We have an exciting update for the sold-out San Marcos Until He Comes conference. This is totally cool. We want as many people as possible to hear all of the important messages that will be presented by, get this, our 7 world-class speakers. So we have a special offer. Listen, if you've already registered for the San Marcos live stream, be sure to check your email for a coupon code that will give you special pricing also for the Texas conference live stream. And if you haven't registered for San Marcos live stream, make sure to do so this week. You'll also receive the special pricing to watch San Marcos and the upcoming Texas conference. Just visit hopeforourtimes.com to register. Make sure to invite your family and friends to also register. And remember, you don't even have to be home during the actual conference. You have a full 30 days to be able to watch whenever you want. Listen, you're going to be super blessed. God bless you guys. Hey, welcome everybody to our Tuesday program. And listen, we're going to have a great time today. I'm getting all kinds of requests about what is going on with the economy, where things are headed. There's a lot of concerns, and there's a lot of information that, quite frankly, I need help sorting through. So I have your favorite guest and my favorite guest on today, Britt Gillette. Welcome, Britt. I should say one of my favorite, because I have, like, everybody's my favorite. And but it's just great having you on here. I have everybody ranked in the top, out of one scale of 1 to 10, everybody's number 1 on my list that joins me.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here.
I'd make a great politician. Hey, so it really is, Britt. You're just a joy and a delight to have on. And thank you for taking time away from life and family. Okay, Britt, we have a lot going on, but first of all, real quick, how can people follow you?
Well, they can just look me up in a search engine under Britt Gillette. I do videos on YouTube and Rumble and Odyssey 3 times a week. I have a website, endtimesbibleprophecy.com, and have books on Amazon and iBooks. So just look me up in a search engine, you'll find me.
Britt is very easy to find. That's what I do every time I get to connect with him. It just Google and pretty easy to find. I see Pablo's things are behind you. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I got my serpents and doves hat right behind me. So that is support Pablo.
That is very cool. Hey, listen, we're gonna have a great program. Before we get going, I want to encourage you to subscribe and share this with everybody that you can. You're going to be greatly encouraged. And just by subscribing, it's free and it helps us to be able to get the word out. And also, we have live stream available for the Southern California Conference. It's available for a full 30 days, although it's starting this Friday and Saturday, going all day. Wonderful host of speakers. but again, you can watch it anytime for 30 days. You don't have to be at your computer or at your phone while the conference is going on. So you can check it out at hopeforourtimes.com or on the app. All right, Britt, let's get going because there are so many different things going on. And I'm really curious about digital currency, the direction that things are going, the economy. You have a few different things that you have mentioned in some recent videos, including a global shock and what we need to be prepared for. You mentioned ground zero. And let's start with this, the global shock, what's coming, ground zero. And then I'm going to ask you about tokenization. I'm going to ask you about, what's this? I think it's called Iceberg or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, Project Icebreaker with the Bank of International Settlements.
I knew something was wrong with Iceberg. So
we're going to hit an iceberg.
We're going to hit an iceberg. That might be the global shock. We're about ready to hear an economic iceberg. Okay, what's the global shock we need to be prepared for?
Well, okay, the global shock that very well could be coming, there is a conference set for the BRICS leaders to meet. So this is high level, this is Putin, Xi, all the leaders of the BRICS nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, August 22nd through August 24th. And there's a lot of speculation involved that they will announce a new BRICS currency that is backed by gold. Now, Jim Rickards, who is an expert in financial markets and currency, he's written a number of New York Times bestsellers on the subject. He's actually wrote about the war in Ukraine 10 years ago and how it plays into all of this power struggle, has come out about a month ago and predicted that that would happen in August. Then just about a week and a half ago, Russian state media came out and also said that there will be an announcement that there will be a gold-backed BRICS currency announcement at that August meeting. Now, what does that mean? Is what people would say. Well, it essentially, it remains to be seen what the details are. But if this currency is convertible into gold, and it doesn't have to be convertible into gold by you and me, but maybe if a nation can go and convert that to gold. Hold on a second. My phone just went off. Then that means that we essentially return to Bretton Woods 2, if nations could do that, which is the monetary system we had a little over 50 years ago when the United States dollar was convertible into gold by other nations. And so what we could see is, and from the very beginning of the Ukraine war, I speculated that this is what they were attempting to do, because what is the Achilles heel of the United States and its allies? I'm sorry, this is going off. Let me just turn it all the way off.
Is it your wife? Did it. It's your wife. You better get it.
No, it's a spam call.
Oh, okay. You need some solar?
It's terrible. But anyway, so if the Achilles heel of the Western financial system is this fiat currency system that we've been involved in since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. So that means that the US dollar is unbacked by anything. Now, we'll get back to this in just a second. We'll go full circle. But a few years after that happened, with Henry Kissinger's help, we negotiated this deal with Saudi Arabia to create what was called the petrodollar, which meant that OPEC would only trade its oil and natural gas products in dollars in exchange for protection from the U.S. military for the Saudi royal family. Now, we've seen that deal start to fall apart over the last couple of years, specifically after we just left Afghanistan and abandoned it. But what we're seeing is these unbacked fiat currency dollars that the United States has, that our allies have, whether it's the euro, the yen, or the dollar. It's backed by nothing. It's being printed and deficit spent. And we're getting to the end of that road. We've pretty much gone as long as we can in the system before it either collapses into a deflationary spiral similar to the Great Depression, or they continue to print and we have loss of faith in the currency and runaway hyperinflation. Well, if you're China and Russia and you want to take out the United States, how do you do that? Well, it's much harder to face down their military, but their military is funded by this petrodollar system that allows the United States to deficit spend at will. And the way you take that out is by using gold to replace that, not the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, which we hear a lot about in the media, but the US Treasury as the reserve asset. So when nations trade, a lot of the central banks around the world, they hold US Treasuries as their reserve asset. Well, they're starting to get upset about that because the interest they're receiving on those treasuries is less than the inflation that we see. And so those treasuries lose their purchasing power over time. So what does not lose its purchasing power over time? Gold. And we've seen the largest accumulation by central bankers of gold in the past year that we've seen since the end of the 1960s, right before Nixon closed the gold window and Bretton Woods, that monetary system ended. So that should tell us a new monetary system is coming. Now, what is coming? We don't know. It could be something as simple as this new currency. It's not necessarily going to replace the BRICS nations' national currencies, but it could become that reserve asset that they use in place of US Treasuries. So for instance, you could create a distributed ledger digital currency that is backed by gold, maybe put at a place like Singapore where people are trustworthy, nations pledge their gold, and then nations can go and they can convert that currency into gold, or they could deposit gold and receive the digital currency in exchange. And people would be able to track that on this open distributed ledger and know that the gold is there. And so it would give a finite amount to that currency. It couldn't simply be printed at will by any government. And if that happens, central banks will be dumping dollars. And then what I think their next step would do, what I would do if I were them, and I was trying to take out the United States, is I would then link that, make that the new petrodollar system. Instead of in the past, as we talked about, OPEC, the OPEC nations agreed only to trade their oil for dollars. We know that Saudi Arabia has expressed interest in wanting to join the BRICS nations, along with the UAE and a number of OPEC nations. If the OPEC nations and Russia say, we will only accept BRICS currency for our oil and natural gas, if you're not a BRICS member nation, then that totally transforms the world economy. It undercuts the United States power and its ability to project military power all across the globe. It probably helps facilitate what is soon to be just the implosion of the Western fiat financial system, which is pretty much a certainty regardless of what they do in August. But this could help be a catalyst that makes that happen faster.
Okay, so I believe it's a certainty too. We can see it, but at the same time, the dollar is pretty much, it's everywhere. When you look at countries and money that's traded and governments, it's everywhere. So if the dollar were to collapse, it can't. If it happens like overnight, it would destroy. It wouldn't just be the United States. China would be China's already in some trouble. I want to ask you a little bit about that.
Sure.
But as we look at things, I look at the book of Revelation, for example, Revelation chapter 6, we have the rider on the black horse. There is going to be a global economic collapse. It's going to be absolutely catastrophic. Famine's going to be breaking out. I believe when I look at Revelation chapter 6, you don't harm the oil or the wine. It's the elite people at the top that are not going to be destroyed by what's coming. But I have a hard time in my mind thinking, okay, we're going to wake up the day after the BRICS meeting and it's going to happen. I think, would I be right in assessing, look, this could be where they pull the trigger, but it's going to take time to develop? Am I thinking right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. This isn't going to be an overnight destruction of the Western financial system. It would cause inflation to remain high in the United States, inflation of the dollar for a number of years. But we could spend a whole nother conversation talking about the problems with the US and the financial system and why that will implode. And as you said, China has its own problems. They have a property bubble. They have a aging, declining population. They have a number of problems, but I think, yes, they would be willing to trade temporary suffering in these countries in order to get out from underneath the dollar and the US financial system. And I think the reason we're seeing all of this speed up is because following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the financial sanctions that were put against Russia were so severe, other countries looked at that and said, what happens when we get on their bad side? We need to find a way to get away from the system. And in the past, you've had smaller countries try to do that, and they couldn't stand up to the military might of the United States. But Russia and China both have nuclear weapons, and they have the ability to do that. And so they are offering a level of protection to these other nations if they want to join in. And so when you look at this alliance that's forming, it encompasses half the world's natural resources, 2 of the 3 largest nuclear powers in the world. If Saudi Arabia is included, you're looking at 2 of the 3 largest oil and natural gas producers on the face of the planet. It's a big deal. But again, for what may or may not happen in August to be relevant, if they're going to announce a gold-backed currency, it must be convertible into gold. It can't just be a promise. It has to be actually convertible. And then that will give a steady value to that currency. And it would probably be preferred as countries' reserve asset over U.S. treasuries. And you could see, if this is part of a financial warfare, you could see coordinated dumping of treasuries as well. That would the United States has a major issue because as we've seen interest rates go up, we see interest on the national debt could very well one day eat up all tax revenue for the entire year. We're in a debt doom cycle right now as far as United States finance goes.
So you bring up a couple of very interesting things. Yeah, I could totally see China and Russia being willing to take whatever heat comes upon them, losses that come upon them for the destruction of the United States. I mean, they don't exactly have governments that treat their people wonderfully. When you look at what they've already been willing to do over the years. So we have that. And then from what I understand with Saudi Arabia, one of the dynamics is with the Biden administration and pulling out of Afghanistan, it points to exactly what you just said. Hey, look what happens when you get on the bad side of the United States, regardless of what kind of promises or an agreement you have with them. And they know that with the Biden administration, Israel's finding out the U.S. administration cannot be trusted, and it doesn't look like anything good is coming out of the U.S. Government in the future too. So when you see this, I'm reading the other day, I think it was like 27 countries now that want to be involved in the BRICS. And you just look at Mexico, you look at this growing list, and it just speaks volumes. Who trusts the United States anymore?
Correct. Yeah. Even France expressed interest in joining the BRICS. I don't know if they're being taken seriously, but if you remember, Emmanuel Macron went and visited China not too long ago. And that was one of the topics on the agenda, was that France was interested in joining BRICS. So we're seeing almost the entire world starting to align up against this dollar system where the United States is holding other countries under its thumb. And they want to get out from underneath that.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to shift gears for a few minutes here. I'll tell you what I want to get to in a minute is, how can the mark of the beast be implemented with the billions of people on the planet in a relatively short time? because once things begin, that will need to be implemented. And I get some of the technology. You're going to get more than me. I'm going to ask you about tokenization, but before I go there, you have a video recently regarding ground zero. What's your thought process on that?
Sure. So regardless of what happens in August, I believe that we are heading into a global economic depression, a worldwide depression, as severe, perhaps worse than the 1930s. I don't think it's going to be as long because of the reaction from the governments is going to be to print currency to bail people out. But ground zero for that depression, I believe, is Europe. And the reason I believe that is because of the energy problems they have. There's a direct correlation between energy use and economic activity. And what we've seen over the past year, we've seen energy prices come down from their highs of several months ago in Europe based on following the invasion of Ukraine. But they're still much higher than they were before. And the uncertainty surrounding those, especially the uncertainty as we head into this winter, is they had a much warmer than expected winter last year in Europe. So they were able to weather that storm. But a lot of companies, they rely on this certainty and they go, well, why would we build a new factory here when there's more reliable energy in these other parts of the world? And so you're essentially seeing the deindustrialization of Europe. You're seeing massive inflation. You're seeing companies that have been in business for a long time shut down. Back in the fall, they talked about in Germany, there were 4 different companies and 4 different types of industries that have been around 150 years, and all 4 of them declared bankruptcy on the same day. So I want you to think about how significant that is. Wow. Because these 4 companies each endured World War I, the hyperinflation of Weimar Germany, the Great Depression, the rise of the Nazis to power, World War II, everything that's taken place ever since. But last year was too much for them and they went bankrupt. So those are the problems we see in Europe, and they continue to make it worse. Mm-hmm. It's not just the loss of the Nord Stream pipelines, but in Germany, they were taking nuclear power plants offline in pursuit of this green energy agenda. And it's leaving the population vulnerable to not having the resources they need to compete in the international marketplace. So you're seeing the deindustrialization of Europe. I believe they're going to go into depression first, and it's going to take the rest of the world with them, because the United States has its own problems. And as we've seen with these rising interest rates, there are, even though we don't hear about the bank failures we heard about just a few months ago, there's still problems within the banking industry, even among the largest banks, where they're holding on to these unrealized losses because they bought all of this debt at low interest rates. And when the interest rates went up, that makes the price of that debt go down. And if they're forced to sell it when depositors come to take out cash, as they did back in March at First Republic and Signature Bank and Silicon Valley, then you're forced to sell at a loss and the bank goes under. So all of those problems still exist. The government put a Band-Aid on it temporarily, but all of those things are coming soon. We're seeing lots of stress. One of the big things that's coming here at the end of August is part of the debt deal that was signed a month ago to raise the debt ceiling said that no longer could the Biden administration continue to push back this student loan debt forbearance. So people who have student loans are going to have to start making those payments again. And on average, it's almost $400 per month for 15 million different people. So all those, that's $400 a month those people aren't going to be spending in the general economy. And that's going to put a huge crimp in consumer spending. There's been analysts that show that it'll make it worse than what we saw in the COVID shutdowns and worse than the depths of the great financial crisis. So all of that's going to hit abruptly in about 6 or 7 weeks, on top of all of these other issues that are going on. And we talked about the death spiral that America's engaged in. Back when they had that debt ceiling debate, the national debt was $31.4 trillion. Well, here we are just a few weeks later, and it's $32.4 trillion. So they spent $1 trillion more in deficit spending just in the last month. That shows how out of control this is, the need to just create this fiat currency. And that's one of the reasons the BRICS nations are trying to potentially establish a gold-backed currency to stop that devaluation from taking place.
Wow, this is some bad news when you look at it from this perspective. But our hope is in Jesus Christ, and we do know there has to be a catastrophic economic event that will take place that's going to help install Antichrist as Mr. Fix-It and this guy who's going to have a solution and the people who are going to look to being Savior. And, you know, I often think of John the Baptist, and in Luke chapter 3, verse 18, the Bible teaches, hey, John the Baptist, he gave these warnings of judgment in order to tell the people the good news. And so we have, the Bible tells us, hey, these are the warnings of what is coming, but we have our great hope is in the Lord Jesus Christ. Because, man, when you look at it like that, you put everything into that perspective, you're thinking all of these things coming about at the same time, amazing. But the Bible did tell us to be prepared for these things. And we know that we're going to be caught up to meet the Lord in the air before the tribulation itself actually begins too. So there's great news when you have the right perspective.
Definitely.
So I also have been reading where it appears that in Europe, I believe the UK specifically, it seems like that's going to be a place where digital currency is first going to be tested or implemented on a grander scale than some of the small things that we've seen so far. Have you heard anything about that, or do you have any insight along those lines?
Yeah, I know there's committees looking at it, and they seem to be actually pushing back against it and saying we can't see the reason for putting this out. But one of the things that is common to both the UK, the United States, and I've seen in Europe where the European Commission is proposing these ideas for CBDCs of the euro and so forth, they say, well, don't worry, it's not going to be programmable. In fact, Christine Lagarde, who's president of the ECB, said central bankers aren't even interested in programmable currency. And one of the European Commission members, their commissioner there, he said, oh, well, this is not a big brother project. So we have official government denials, right? And I always tell people, once you hear the official government denial, if you have any suspicion that something bad's going to happen, you can take it to the bank. You can be guaranteed it's coming when you get the official government denial. So they may very well roll these out initially as non-programmable.
You can trust
in order to, build trust and make people oh, well, see, it's not what all these people like Tom and Britt were saying. It's not programmable. Oh. And then once you walk into that trap and they get rid of the cash and you're in that system, well, then they'll make it programmable and they'll say, oh, well, we never said it wouldn't ever be programmable, just that it was not programmable.
It wasn't that day that she said it.
Right. And so for people that don't understand what that means that they'll be able to control that currency. They could put all sorts of algorithms into it saying, well, if you post something on social media that we don't like, they can essentially attach a social credit system score to you and then to your currency, so that if you go into you do something that you're not supposed to do, they could say, well, your currency doesn't work outside of the town you live in, or your currency can't be used to purchase plane tickets to leave the country, or your currency can't be used. They had one guy at the World Economic Forum just this week, I believe, say it could be used to make sure that people don't purchase things that the government doesn't want them to, like ammunition, right? So they could do whatever they want. They will have complete and total control if the system is implemented, and make no doubt that's what they want to do. And you talked about, well, how could this mark of the beast system come into play? And I think one of the things you mentioned was the actual mark of the beast system doesn't come till the midpoint of the tribulation. So we know there's at least 3.5 years or so for them to be able to build up to that system. But they're putting the infrastructure in place right now. And I don't think that it would be very hard in the midst of an absolute economic crisis where people are, you have another Great Depression scenario where people are struggling to pay their rent, feed themselves, feed their families, where they would simply say, sign up for your central bank digital currency account, go claim your e-wallet, and there's $10,000 waiting for you because they can create this out of thin air because there is nothing backing it. So they could give that to people. It doesn't require, we don't know what form the mark of the beast will take. It doesn't require a microchip implanted under the skin, although we've seen stories about that. It could be simply, they can hook up to the system or at least establish the infrastructure that will lead to that through use of palm print scanning or retinal scanning. All of that technology exists today. We're starting to see some of those things rolled out at places like Amazon Go, where you can scan your palm, you enter the store, you pick up what you want, you walk out, it charges it to your account. We see Aldi rolled out some stores recently where you couldn't enter the store until you had downloaded their app connecting you and your account to, and it was the same concept. You could go in and pick up what you want and just leave the store and it charges to your account. But if you wanted to walk in with cash and buy something, well, you couldn't even enter the store. So that's one of the ways they'll be able to implement this is we sort of saw a dry run of this over the last 3 years in terms of what can we get people to comply with in the middle of a crisis. And if they roll this out in the middle of a crisis and get enough people to buy into it, then the ones that are the holdouts and won't buy into it, well, they'll start to get shut out. And you'll start to say, well, if you don't have the central bank digital currency, you can't shop here. And that can come straight down from the government where they're making the banks compliant with using that. And then they could simply say, the banks, all of your customers have to be compliant with that, which means all of their businesses have to be compliant with that. And all of those businesses are going to have to force their customers to be compliant with that. So they could roll this out relatively quickly. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be a week or a month or anything like that. But we're seeing the pieces put in place. And I think what's more important than how it will be done is the fact that it can be done, that there are people who want to do it. Because keep in mind, the book of Revelation was written almost 2,000 years ago. And up until recently, outside of the supernatural, there was no way that it could be done. But we're seeing that it could be done now. And I think you couple that with all the other signs we see that Jesus and the prophets said to look for, and it tells us the times we're living in right now.
Amen. Again, just a reminder of all of these events that point to the Lord calling us home. You answered a lot of my questions just with what you said, because I look at it, Britt, 8 billion people on the planet. How are you going to get everybody ID'd? I was just down in Mexico. Let me tell you, they're not ready for certain things down there. And a lot of other countries aren't. And there's major pockets of resistance. You mentioned what's going on in the UK now. There's people resisting the digital money. And just the dynamics of things that are happening. And a lot of the resistance is coming from people who don't even believe in the Bible. We do, right, and we have the warnings, but a lot of people are saying, hey, wait a minute, we can kind of tell what's going on. So, but you answer some great, you have some great answers to really deal with a lot of the questions people have. You bring along a catastrophe, people start standing in bread lines to get food. And you're right, we already have Amazon, you mentioned Aldi. I'm seeing more and more of these types of things. So really, it's kind of like it was as you described with COVID. You have it. The government doesn't have to enforce many things. It's just companies will. Restaurants were saying you can't come here and eat. Stores were saying you can't come here and shop. The government didn't have to come in and say you can't do it. We just had Fauci and others say, hey, you got to wear a mask and you shouldn't do this. But there was no law that I remember that was ever passed that said this had to happen. And we're already watching Google censors us, Facebook censors, YouTube censors. Oops, I'm not allowed to say that. But there's the censorship is there not by the government, but by these companies. So and then, being positioned to or put into place, hey, you got to enforce these things. So really, what you're saying is the system of the beast is being built right now, and it doesn't have to be implemented with the mark of the beast till you get to the midpoint of the tribulation. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because what we're seeing right now, this platform that's being built, this infrastructure that's being put out, it's indistinguishable in function from the mark of the beast, meaning we've already seen how they can cut off your ability to buy and sell. The Canadian truckers are firsthand evidence of that. We've seen recently in the UK, Nigel Farage he had been banking with a specific bank for 40 years. They closed his account, and he has not been able to open another one as far as I know right now. And if he is able to, it's going to be because of the political pressure that a person of his stature can apply. But if it was you or me, we'd be out of luck. And so you'd basically be kicked out of society if you're unable to be able to buy and sell. And when they have this platform where there is no cash and everything's digital, and you can't even enter the store unless you identify who you are, unless you've been given permission. If they program that currency saying you can't enter the store, what are you going to do? And so that's why this is a big trap that once we walk into it, there's no escape. The only escape is going to be when Jesus Christ comes back, the end of the tribulation, and destroys this global empire and the Antichrist. That's the escape. Or now, as you said, we plan on being gone in the rapture before the tribulation period. But that system, even though it's not the mark of the beast right now, that doesn't come till the midpoint of the tribulation. That system that will enable that to take place is being built right now, right before our eyes.
Yeah, man, another reason, folks, just to be prepared. Get your mind set on the Lord Jesus Christ and recognize he's our only hope, because after the rapture, when the tribulation begins, things are going to get exponentially worse, way worse. The things, we just talk about these things, but what's coming is going to be far worse than we can actually describe with our own minds. The Bible describes, Britt, you look at the third of the green, all the green vegetation is going to be burned up. The sea life is going to be destroyed. Volcanoes are going to be erupting that will cause major damage, way worse than we have now. Massive earthquakes, meteorites hitting the earth, asteroids hitting the earth, economic catastrophe, famine, great war. The list just goes on and on. When you look at the 3 sets of judgments coming to the tribulation, praise God, the rapture is coming before that. I don't want to be here for that. People say, I'll go through it and I'll trust Christ at that time if what you're telling me is true. Hey, good luck with that. If you can't live for Christ now, how are you going to die for him when everything is shut off and you can't buy or sell? Literally, survival is going to become almost impossible, which brings me to another point I want to ask you about this, tokenization. I'm hearing about it. People have been writing to me about it. And as we look at this mark of the beast and the system developing, can you describe what this tokenization is?
Yeah, without getting too down into the minute details, it's basically what they're talking about is this distributed ledger system that would allow what we see as the backbone of Bitcoin right now. So you have all of these different entities verifying the authenticity of a certain person's ownership. And so they want to build out this distributed ledger system. The Bank of International Settlements is actually talking about a unified distributed ledger system, which would basically mean that each nation would have its own central bank digital currency. But in order for those central bank digital currencies to be interoperable with one another, they would have to be on the same platform controlled by the Bank of International Settlements. So for instance, if you're in China and I'm in Europe and we want to make a trade with each other and we have different central bank digital currencies, how do we make that happen? Well, the Bank of International Settlements would set up the platform and the infrastructure to make that happen. And in doing that, they have this Project Icebreaker that you referenced earlier. That is to develop the system and develop global standards for the implementation of central bank digital currencies so that each of these national central bank digital currencies complies with those standards, and therefore they would be able to trade with one another and you'd be able to have global trade seamlessly. But the problem that presents is that puts the Bank of International Settlements in a position where they could control who could buy or sell within that system, and they would be able to turn you on or turn you off on the individual level. So you also see this with the tokenization, where they're talking about that with currency. So that's what central bank digital currency would be, was essentially tokenization of your currency. So dollars could be tokenized, and that would be the US central bank digital currency. But they've also talked about doing tokenization of assets, which would mean the house you live in. If you own your house, that would show up on this unified distributed ledger that you're the owner. And then if there are any claims to that, those would also show up. So this would help facilitate easier title searches, some of the same things that go on today. It would make it much more efficient, but it would also give the government insight into everything that everyone owns. And they'll claim, well, this is necessary. You know, we need this 21st century regulatory authority to deal with the world we live in today. Because what happens if you have a hedge fund and they pledge the same collateral to 3 or 4 different banks to take out loans, and they make a bad trade, they fail. Now we're at risk of those banks going under. And then that creates a contagion risk within the financial system. So we need this. It's one of the ways they're going to be able to sell this. I believe they'll be selling it in the aftermath of the calamity that is to come. And they're going to point to it and say, we could have avoided all of this if we had only had central bank digital currency. We would have known what was on the balance sheets of these different entities. For instance, think of Bernie Madoff, who ran the world's largest Ponzi scheme and became exposed back in the great financial crisis as running that Ponzi scheme. With central bank digital currency, it would be impossible for him to run that Ponzi scheme unless he's part of the government, because they're the ones running the Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, no kidding.
So they would have to participate in it. He could run it in that sense, but if he's trying to keep it from the government, there would be no way for him to do that. And so they'll point to that and say, look at all these people whose lives were ruined by Bernie Madoff. We could have avoided all of that. And there will probably be other Bernie Madoffs when the markets collapse here soon. I believe it's coming probably before the end of the year. But that's one of the ways they're going to sell this. They're going to talk about all of the benefits that could have been had. And again, people, when they're desperate, they trade freedom and liberty for the sense of security, for a piece of bread to eat. And that's how we end up in this position that we're going to end up in.
I think of the words of Satan to God when he's talking about Job. He said, let me touch him skin for skin. A man will do anything to save his life, whether it be bread to eat or whatever thing they are afraid of. And these people at the top manipulating everybody, they know that same thing. And so just manipulating people by fears. I'd love to have you back on another time to talk about this, Britt, because I get this question a lot. Well, what happens if we're not raptured, say, before these things start to collapse and digital currency comes along? What should we do? So I know we don't have time to do that today, but I'd love to have you back on and get your thoughts on that, because, like you said, once you're in it, you're trapped. There's no way out. Listen, everyone, again, a reminder, You can join us for the live stream. It's coming up Southern California, San Diego area this Friday and Saturday. You can check it out on the app and hopeforourtimes.com. Great list of speakers, including Brandon Holthouse, Billy Crone, Scott Townsend's going to be joining us, and others. Going to be absolutely terrific. And then also, Britt, one last time, people can follow you. They can put your name into whatever search engine they have, and they can find you there. You also have videos, too, that people can watch.
Sure. Yes, I'm on YouTube. I'm on Rumble. I'm on Odyssey. I have books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Apple. So just put me in a search engine. I'll show up.
Great. Listen, I would recommend getting anything that Britt has. You will not be disappointed. In fact, you're going to go, man, this is fantastic. That's how I discovered Britt, was just by reading. And I said, man, I got to get a hold of him. And just wonderful having you today, Britt. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and look forward to seeing you right here tomorrow.